Balsillie. Will he shoot? He does. He scores!
It was a Canadian icon as big as, well, Wayne Gretzky.
I've been, from day one, a Blackberry user.
An underdog startup
We invented the smartphone.
that wowed the world and became a global brand everyone just had to have, including the most powerful people in the White House, on screen
I can't find my Blackberry.
and off. Research in Motion changed the way we communicate and introduced two new Canadian legends, joint CEOs Mike Lazaridis and Jim Balsillie.
I'd say we're both type A quadruple plus, yes.
But technology kept evolving, and Steve Jobs was on the hunt.
This is one device, and we are calling it iPhone.
All of a sudden, BlackBerry appeared stuck in time.
Do you ever look at it and go, what are we going to do if this isn't our primary business?
No.
Soon, its market share collapsed.
I still have a Blackberry.
One guy has a
Owning one became uncool. New products fizzled. And a 15-year-old partnership came unglued. Balsillie and Lazaridis have never opened up about how their dream fell apart and the personal betrayal they both felt until now. All that's revealed in a new book about the spectacular rise and fall of BlackBerry, called Losing the Signal. I sat down with its co-author, Jacquie McNish, earlier this week in Toronto. Jacquie, great book.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Good to be here.
So it's called Losing the Signal, the spectacular rise and fall of BlackBerry. They blew it?
Yes, they blew it, but it's a much richer story than that. The incredible thing for me, and the thing that my colleague Sean Silkoff and I learned writing this book, was just the pace of the smartphone race. Don't forget, BlackBerry was introduced in 1999, and they brought us one bit of the internet, which is your email. And then along came the iPhone, which brought you a whole Mac inside a phone. And BlackBerry went from $0 to $20 billion, back down to today, $3 billion in revenue in 10 years. There has never been such a fast technology race, not really since television was introduced in the 50s.
So what happened? Can you boil it down? Is it, there was the two guys
Well, I
and
got
there
a
was the
book for you.
technology. Yes.
What happened is, the classic innovator's dilemma. You invent a product that everyone loves. They owned more than 50% of the market. We were all addicted to our Blackberries. It changed our lives, how we worked, how we communicated, and they enjoyed being on top of the hill for a brief period of time. This little company in Waterloo that started above a bagel store, and then you get the big Silicon Valley predators, Apple and Google, and later Samsung, the Korean handset maker, turning their lenses on this very profitable company and going after the market. Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in January 2007 and pointed his big guns at BlackBerry and said, we're going into the smartphone market. It's going to be bigger than computers. I mean, he was a visionary. He knew how big this market was going to be. And back in Waterloo, Mike Lazaridis and Jim Balsillie, the two co-CEOs, looked at this phone and said it will never work, because they had grown up in an environment where bandwidth was so limited. You had to be very efficient.
They didn't get it. They saw the touch screen and didn't get it.
It was more than they didn't get it. They didn't think the carriers would be able to carry the capacity and the traffic that the iPhone would generate.
We always heard lots of gossip about their relationship and that they had started to pull apart, but you've actually revealed a lot of what went on behind the scenes. And I guess before we get into how it fell apart, how did they come together? And they're two really driven but really different egos, brains.
Two very different men, and it's not uncommon in technology to see an innovator like Mike Lazaridis pair up with a business person. That is a common model. But what's, I think, unique about this story is just how different they were. Mike Lazaridis, since he was a kid, was the boy wizard in the in his lab, in his parents' basement, doing all sorts of amazing things, and very much confident that he was going to create things that were going to reinvent the world. He had that confidence and belief from the beginning.
Tell us about Jim Balsillie, very different character.
Jim Balsillie is probably one of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life. He's a guy who was born in Peterborough, Ontario. He says he didn't do that well in school. but he could do a grade 7 math test after being ostracized for his teacher for being so lippy, without doing a lot of studying, and came first in the province.
Wow.
So he obviously, from an early age, was a very intelligent
outsider,
man.
right?
Very
Saw
much an
himself as an
outsider.
outsider.
A lot of people aren't aware that he has Métis background. His father was very self-conscious of that. So he grew up in that environment in Peterborough, feeling that they were not part of the in crowd. And he had this plan. He decided after reading Peter Newman's The Canadian Establishment that he would follow the establishment route to success.
Become part of the elite.
Right. Trinity College, Clarkson Gordon as an accountant, and getting your MBA at Harvard, all of which he did.
So the two men meet, and then Lazaridis says, got to see if you pass the wife test, brings him home.
Right. He brings him home. His wife, it was his fiancée at the time, Ophelia. He said, I'm not hiring you until you meet Ophelia because she's got a great sense of character. So Jim Balsillie and his wife went to have dinner with the two of them, and they walked away, and Ophelia turns to Mike Lazaridis and said, he's a shark. And Mike Lazaridis said, he may be a shark, but he's going to be my shark. And Mike Lazaridis had the wherewithal to know he needed that because he didn't understand business. He didn't understand how predatory it was. And at the time, he was surrounded by people that weren't paying him properly, weren't paying him enough, and it was just a constant fight for survival. So the two of them, although they were unlikely, complemented each other. And till his final day at Research in Motion and Blackberry, Jim Balsillie never went into the lab. He never went in and saw what Mike was tinkering with because he ran the business and Mike ran the labs.
You tell this amazing story of a wireless convention, a huge deal where all the big powerful players are, and they're still little guys at this point. And Balsillie goes, and is that in Cannes? Tell me about that.
They're in Cannes, and it's a convention of all sorts of people in the wireless area, wireless data transmission, cellular companies as well, and sort of the quest for a young company. At this point, they were heading towards inventing the Blackberry, and he has to get more carriers on side so that they can sell the Blackberry in Europe and in other countries. And the big boys were all at the head table. He gets into the room early, looks around. He's at the cocktail party, not making contact with anybody. And so he decides to walk around. He's frustrated, and he sees all the tables. And he goes to the head of the dais where the head table is and sees next to it there's a table with all the carriers, Vodafone, other European carriers.
All the big shots.
And all the waiters are around, setting the tables and everything. And he looks at the nameplates, pulls out his business card, folds it over, writes his name in a similar script to the others, puts it down on the table next to the two CEOs that he wants to sit with and says, waiter, you don't have a chair here. You don't have enough chairs. So he sits himself in the middle of all the, the biggest executives in Europe in the business and, becomes a known entity after that.
Balsillie. Mm-hmm. It worked.
It did.
Wow.
Yeah.
The relationship starts to come unglued. What happened? It sounds like they felt like betrayed.
I think that's part of it. I think it first starts with the patent battle. The patent battle with a company called NTP, which in the end they had to pay over $600 million to settle. So I think that for Mike Lazaridis in particular, that was an exhausting experience, and he disappeared for 2 weeks after. So he was in a fairly fragile state. And then you add on a layer of the stock options investigation. And when that happened, Mike Lazaridis was of the view that this never should have happened. He put the blame on Jim Balsillie's doorstep. You're the guy that ran finance. How could you have allowed this to happen? It's your fault. And Jim Balsillie didn't feel the same way and felt that in the lead up to the negotiations to a settlement with the Ontario Securities Commission, that maybe in his mind, Mike Lazaridis had been a little disloyal by pointing the finger at him. The friendship ended at that point, but they continued to run the company.
Well, it's amazing. You see news conferences or statements made at that time, and they're always smiling. They're still cocky. But you write that Balsillie was suffering from depression, and that Lazaridis was going through post-traumatic stress disorder. Almost, it was quite the public and the private picture were so
very different. And the more difficult things became, the less public they became. They became much more publicity shy, and that's, I think, a big mistake if you're a company going through a tough time. You don't go into cocoon. You stand up and you communicate. You manage expectations. We didn't get this product right. We're going to get the next one right. And I think that at its core, by not finding a way to deal with it, the board just sort of stood back and didn't try and interfere with this rift that was developing between the two CEOs. And what happened as a result is that you end up with two camps. And in one camp, you have Mike Lazaridis, who believes understandably that handsets are the future, and that's where they're going to go.
Because
And
he
Jim-
created them.
Yeah, he did. I mean, that's the innovator's dilemma. How do you let go of what you believe in and cannibalize that and move into something totally different? Jim was more of the view that you had to cannibalize the handsets and move into software. Was it BBM? Was it SMS texting? All these different things that we now take for granted today.
Instant
He
messaging
could, he could see it coming. He could see it coming and
So
wanted
was
to
he
move-
right?
I think in the end he was right. Was he the right person to deliver that? I don't know. I think at that point the company became, what's the word I'm looking for? The company became increasingly unmanageable and dysfunctional as the rifts set people apart from each other. There became strategic confusion about what the company should do, who should do what within the organization. The leadership was experiencing this rift. People aren't stupid. They know within the organization what happens. So you have one CEO with his team and another CEO with his team, and they're no longer working as seamlessly as they once did.
So here's two guys that used to share an office. You write that they shared a password. They,
Right.
and in the end, they're not even speaking to each other. It's kind of sad.
It's very sad. The whole story is a tragedy, but I don't think it's a tragedy like a Nortel. It's a tragedy for the two men that this great friendship that created this great company is no more. But what I do give Jim and Mike credit for is the way they ran that company. There was enough gas left in the tank, if you will, to keep the company going. And by that I mean Mike Lazaridis still had a library of innovations, while Jim Balsillie in his financing, the company had over $5 billion of cash when it ran into trouble in 2013. It had no debt, it was conservatively financed. It allowed them to buy time to get through their problems.
Been lots of obituaries written about RIM and about them. They're portrayed sort of as losers. Is that a Canadian thing?
I don't think they are, because I think it's incredible that they even got to be a $20 billion company. Because as you know from reading the book, there were so many predators that tried to do them in from the beginning, and they outsmarted them. They outsmarted Motorola. They outsmarted Nokia. Those guys are the roadkill in this story. RIM is not roadkill. It's a much smaller, diminished company. It still has a future. It still has assets that are worth something. Will it be a $20 billion company again? I don't think so.
Well, it was great to read the inside story. Thanks so much, Jackie.
Oh, it's
Thank
great
you.
to be here, Wendy. Thank you.